Hello, greetings and salutations, everybody. My name is TriggerFTU, also known as the Phantom Fox. Today we have a rather unusual one. Yes, you'll notice that the room that I'm in is currently different from the one that I normally do for production. Working on a new studio room to work with, and this is what I was given to work with. So, this episode is definitely an episode that hurts my soul. As y'all probably don't know, I'm a big fanboy of AMD hardware, not so much of Intel. So whatever happens, pretty much happens, regardless as to what platform we play or start games on. And today we're going to be testing out another game which is currently known to have a bit of bugs and some not so much. We're going to be playing Lego Star Wars, the Skywalker Collection, I believe it's called. Skywalker Edition, Skywalker. Anyways, dealing with Skywalkers. Anyways, will it play on the GPD Win 3 or with the Neo Pro? Let's find out, shall we? Let's try it out. Starting off today, we're going to be starting with the GPD Win 3. Now, this is a rather unusual but also amazing piece of hardware, as it does run the 1165 G7. And as you can see, it's currently running at over 1,000 frames per second on the loading screen. GPU is running at 93%, CPU at around 16. It's maxing out at 25 watts, which is what our TDP is set for in normal settings. Now, my initial idea is to try to play the game without having too much tweaking involved. Now we do see that the game is in loading screen and it drops down to around 37 frames per second. Still stabilized around 40. It's nice and smooth. So we'll load into the game, of course. First thing we're going to take a look at is the options. Taking a look, we're not going to modify anything at all. It's currently set up for 1280 by 600. Let's see if we can bring it up to the screen resolution. And everything is set to high for some reason. This is all set predefined without any huge modification, so this is what's been set by the game itself, with the exception of the screen resolution. We'll use a native connection, a native one, which is at 720p, and wow, temporal FSAA is actually pretty good. Reducing and disabling may improve the performance, so we can turn the anti-aliasing off, but we're going to keep it at temporal. So that's what we currently have. Let's see here. We'll load the game. Let's see here. In a galaxy long, long ago, far, far away. We are currently here in the Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, and we are to be following Jar Jar Binks. And starting off into the game, we are still at a stable 60 FPS with limited to no problems. Controls are really nice. The fact that this is actually working so well is amazing. We start putting a little bit more elements onto the screen, and it seems to drop down to roughly around 40 to 60 FPS, but it still keeps pretty high at around 60 to 70 FPS with no problem. This is kind of amazing as it is running Intel integrated graphics. The GPU does fluctuate between 100 to 70 FPS, 100 to 70, which we currently still see up to 90. It drops down only ever so slightly. The game is running at 20 watts, which isn't even the maximum on normal settings. Normal settings right now is set up to the maximum wattage of around 25. Now this is with settings set to high. This is amazing considering this is all running off of Intel integrated graphics. What we'll do is we'll try loading into another galaxy. Maybe we can load into another game. Let's see here. A New Hope? Let's start with an episode of The New Hope. Of course, like always, in a galaxy long ago, far, far away, we have everything loading up and it still runs at around roughly 300 FPS. That is a lot of speed. So we are currently here in the very beginning scene. It's still running at over 120 frames per second, 110. We see that Princess Leia is really powerful, and it's this, and it's a lot of stuff going on the scene. C-3PO and R2 running across the screen. We start blasting some things here and there to see if we can actually accumulate a lot of stuff on the screen, and it still runs and chugs along. Let's take a look at the settings right now, as it's still probably running at a good high. We'll turn off the anti-aliasing altogether and see how well things will push. And the game starts running still at over 100 FPS. Which isn't half bad. See here, what we can do is we'll try lowering all the video settings to bare minimum. Oops, we brought that on high. Image sharpening, we can keep it on, but we'll disable it to see if we can improve the performance. See how high we can push an FPS. Still running everything at the bare minimum, we still push over 100 frames per second, even while things were going on. We were dropping down to around 40 FPS. This is amazing to see, considering that this is completely a remake of the original game that was made back in the day. As we progress through the game, we can clearly see that the FPS still keeps on high. No problems whatsoever. There's still a few glitches, but not enough to really complain about, as it doesn't drop any lower than maybe around 90 frames per second. We kept a good stable 60 whenever it came down to the Phantom Menace, and playing this one we're still pushing it around 50 to 60 and almost sometimes even keeping a stable 100 FPS. This is amazing to see, as this game was made for consoles. And with all the new performance updates, the fact that it's running so ridiculously well is amazing. The controls are very fluid, using the controls that we have here with the GPD Win 3. Of course, the analog sticks is to go along with it. And as the scene continues on, as active rendering, it drops down to around 80 to 90 FPS, which isn't too bad. Interesting stuff, I will admit. The music is very iconic. I wouldn't doubt if they actually chose to use some of the original music that they had pulled off from the original game, or even remotely from some of the classic games, or even from the movie itself. This is what we got on the GPD Win 3, and it's kind of amazing to see that this game is running so ridiculously well, especially with such a high frame rate. It just goes to show that integrated graphics and also with Windows 11 run really amazingly well for this game. It could be that they're using the new, is because of the new scheduler that Windows 11 currently uses, which really does point more towards the Intel integrated graphics as well as the Intel platform. The CPU has been pretty stable at 20%. GPU at a good whopping 90 to 100, which as it probably should. Goes to show some amazing things can be done on handhelds. Well, since it's been played here on GPD Win 3 and also shows to be capable on the Nintendo Switch, let's switch over to the INEO and see how well that works, shall we? We'll switch it up and hop on out. So, starting off with the INEO. Now, this runs a AMD 4800U with a Vega 8 graphics. Something I forgot to load up is, of course, MSI Afterburner, so we get at least a good view as to what we're working with here. Loading up the game, we clearly see that it is doing pretty well for itself. I currently have the CPU set to about 11 watts, which is, you know, something for saving up on battery life. The screen setting is set to 800p, and whoa. Loading the game, we see a small dip to around 15 FPS, but it runs at around close to 20 to 30 FPS. Something doesn't feel right. We're going to take a look at the options here and see what we have available to us. Currently set for 720p, which isn't too bad. Everything is low and off as to where it should be. We can change it up to 800p so that it's be more native, but we're going to do apples to apples right now at 720p right now. So, we're going to see about continuing the game. Of course, it'll let us load into the game automatically. It starts to load, and we're still seeing that ominous dip as the CPU doesn't exceed 11 watts. I'll bypass this real quick. And loading into the game isn't too bad. We still get around 40 FPS. Mind you, we are running at around 11 watts at 720p. So things are going to look a little janky at start. What's unusual is that it's actually stabilizing almost around 30 FPS. Okay, it's understandable the GPU isn't running too hot, nor is the CPU. The CPU runs at a maximum 11 watts, so what we'll do is we will hit the button, hit our Windows key, and then switch it up to 15 watts. Switch back over to the game. We see a little bit of a performance change as the game starts to run up at around 40 FPS and 30. Seems less complicated but more fun to play, and at least more playable. We still see random dips as the CPU doesn't reach any higher than 15 watts. Okay, fair enough. Could be that the schedule is not fully optimized, even though the update for Windows 11 was pushed for this. But it's highly unusual that the Intel in the GPD Win 3 is and was pushing around 60 FPS in this game, or at least in this episode. It seems rather unusual. Alright. We'll hit the Windows key one more time, switch it up to 20 watts, which is around how much we had whenever it came to the GPD Win 3, and we can see that the game is still around roughly 50 frames per second-ish, at around 20 watt TDP. But it still stabilizes around 30 to 40 FPS. That's not all that much. And then the unusuality is filling that turn, it starts to go below 30 FPS. This doesn't feel right. And as you can see, in our settings, everything's set to low or off, so we should be getting a lot more performance out of it. You know what? Let's max this out and see how far we'll go. We'll go up to 30 watts. Going up to 30 watts, we see the game literally start to rev up at around 22 watts in maximum, and probably reach around 50 at a maximum, but it still seems to randomly slow down and bog down to around 25 to 29 FPS. It could be this episode is bugged and having some complications. We'll switch over to the other game, which was A New Hope, and we'll see how well that works. Loading into the intro, it still bogs down and keeps it around 30 FPS, whereas the Intel run a lot more higher. We'll fast forward into the game and we'll see how things look and play. Loading into the game, we can clearly see that it actually starts to stabilize roughly at around 50 to 40 FPS, but we still see that really unusual random situation. Now we're dropping around 30 FPS at complete random time frames. This is unusual considering that this device was built specifically for gaming. We start bringing in more stuff into the screen. We see the animation pass off. It's still running around 30 to 40 FPS, which isn't too bad. But we still see random bog downs. Is the game playable? In my perspective, anything that stays above 30 FPS, yes. If it's going to be glitching, might not be the kind of gameplay you want to have to enjoy. Let's take a look at the settings. We'll start switching it up to native resolution, which is 1280 by 800, and we'll see how things look from there. The game looks nice, without a doubt. The feeling of the controls are actually pretty good, and at native resolution of 800p, we can see that it still bogs down and holds at around 30 to 40 FPS. Now, whether or not this could be playable is entirely up to you. I rather enjoy it at anywhere between 30 plus FPS. It's just highly unusual that there's rather odd glitching from time to time. We see the game max out at around anywhere between 18 to 20 watts on the CPU package, not so much for the Vega. The GPU is running at around 50%, which is unusual at 1200 megahertz. The thing that really tickles me weird is the fact that the CPU is not reaching any more than 6 to 7%. This is weird. Considering that this is an AMD GPU and CPU, it should technically be pushing a little bit more oomph, and it's not. It is using the GPU to its maximum degree, which is convenient because this is a game to be played. This isn't built for word processing. But you can see that the controls aren't half bad, and whenever some of the gameplay is happening, it's actually really convenient and enjoyable when you don't have the random glitching. Just personal perspective, if things rock at a good 30 to 40 FPS and then randomly dip to 15 FPS completely at random, I personally find it unplayable. Others might be able to get around it, is no problem. But, you know, apples for apples. Play them as they may, play them as you will. Everyone to their own opinion. As you can see, the game started to bog down as I started to do some building. It seems to be whenever there's 3D elements, or at least a large amount of them, popping up on the screen for this game, on this platform. I'm not sure. Let's see if we can stop it for a second. We'll hop into Windows real quick and see what we can do about that TDP. We'll jump it up to around 30 again to give it another go. Checking everything out, it seems to jump up to, well, it actually jumped up for a short moment and then dropped again. Once again, an unusual situation with AMD platforms and architecture when it comes to Windows 11. We'll see about probably reinstalling Windows 10, as that's probably the best bet for anything dealing with AMD integrated graphics or even with CPU packages. As we can see, it's not even reaching any higher than around 8%. Oh well. Question is, will it play? Yeah, it will. Will it play well? That's entirely up to you. Anything 30 plus without glitching, I would say yes. Since we're having some unusual glitching, it just feels really weird. Especially whenever I go to rotate and check the screen out, all the rendering does drop it around 30 FPS, 13 FPS to 9 FPS. Whereas with the GPD Win, it's kept at a stable 60 to 50 FPS with no problem. This bothers me. So will it play? Yeah. Will it play well? It's entirely up to personal perspective. So there you have it, everybody. The fact that everything is working very well on the GPD Win 3 with integrated Xe graphics and not so much on the AMD with the Vega 8 literally hurts my soul, because Intel hasn't been known to be really good with integrated graphics. Not for a very long time, or ever in this matter. But the fact that it ran at 60 FPS or even above 30 in general with no hitches, compared to the Neo, which runs a 4000U with a Vega 8 graphics card? Oh, yeah, it's integrated graphics. But the fact is, what happened? It might be because we're using Windows 11. Windows 11 does not have a good scheduler for AMD-based hardware, and something that you've noticed is the fact that the amount of wattage towards the CPU was very, very limited. In some cases, it would dip down to 5 watts, causing the game to bog down. Whereas with the Intel, the scheduler worked pretty much without any problem. For this case, I think for future endeavors, I'll be switching my Neo back to Windows 10 so that we can at least get apples to apples, or at least a decent amount of performance out of it, to see whether or not it will play on Windows 10, since Windows 11 is still currently not exactly all that stable. Until next time, guys, remember to hit that subscribe button, follow through. I do have a Twitch channel. It's TriggerFTU as well. We also have a YouTube for that channel that I do a lot of streaming on as well as Facebook. Hit us up. You'll be able to ask any question that you want. Try out anything that you'd like. Put up a recommendation of whatever you'd like to see. And like always, keep being amazing.